Hey, Your Worship, anytime when he steps away. You are good to go, Your Worship.
Thank you. Hereby call the City of Lloydminster regular council meeting for Monday, April 20th, 2020 to order. At this time, we will take a silent moment of personal reflection. As a reminder, all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Lloydminster Charter regarding any item on this agenda. Not seeing any to be noted, is there any additions or deletions that I should be aware of for this agenda?
No, Your Worship.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 3. I'll look for council's direction on the approval of the agenda that's been provided. Councillor Buckingham.
Move that the agenda dated April 20th, 2020 be approved.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Fragment. Thank you very much. Any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Council. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the previous meeting minutes. I'll look for direction, Council. Councillor Buckingham.
I move that the regular council minutes dated April 6, 2020 be approved.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Monroe. Thank you very much. Any discussion from those minutes that need to be noted at this time? Anything else? Not seeing anything noted, I will call the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Moving on to agenda item number 5, business arising from the minutes. Not seeing any noted. Moving on to item number 6, new business. And I will look to the city manager.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. To present 6.2.1 Community Services Building lease extension request, I'll ask the City Clerk, Doug Rodwell, to present.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. The item you have before you is the Community Services Building lease extension request. And the recommendation is the Council approve extending the current lease agreements to the remaining community service building tenants, being the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce, the Lloydminster Clinic, Lloydminster Construction Association, and the Lloydminster Learning Council and the MS Society with the City of Lloydminster. At the current lease rates for the space in the Community Services Building located at 4419 52nd Avenue to September 30th, 2020. The City of Lloydminster administration has received requests from the remaining tenants in the community services building to extend the current lease agreements to December 31st, 2020 or June 30th, 2021, and waive the period of lease rent. COVID-19 has impeded some of the negative COVID-19 has impeded some negative effects to the tenants' plan to relocate. The background is in the 2019 administration completed a high-level review of the community services building and concluded that the facility had reached its end of serviceable life. The issues identified in the review were costly, and the city made the decision not to make any major financial investments in the facility prior to its decommissioning. On June 24th, 2019, Council passed Motion 163-2019 to decommission the community services building effective June 30th, 2020. The tenants were provided a one-year notice to vacate the premises. The decommissioning of the building is included in the 2020 capital budget. As a result, the city is planning to decommission the building prior to the end of the year. Tenants in the community services building are currently paying a below-market rent for the leased premises and have not had a rental increase since January 1st, 2018. For this reason, administration believes that the lease rents should not be waived. If council approves this request, there will be an addendum attached to all leases that the tenants will be required to sign in order to receive the extension. The addendum will provide that the city is not required to undertake repairs deemed unnecessary or too costly to the building. Further, administration will reserve the right to immediately close the community services building prior to September 30th if they become aware of health and safety risks or building component failures such as building envelope, mechanical, or electrical systems. The tenant would be aware of these conditions prior to signing the addendum and understand that the city may take those decisions without an assumption of liability for losses or damages to any of the tenant's operations. The options are that the council approves extending the current lease to September 30th, 2020. The council deny the request of the remaining community service building tenants and not extend the lease, or the council request administration to bring back further information. The alignment with strategic plan is this item is in alignment with the following strategic area: is open and responsive government, ensuring that the city is listening and responding to residents and businesses during a difficult time. Legal review: the tenants are currently in a month-to-month lease agreement until June 30th, 2020. If council motion is moved, moved to extend the lease agreement, the city and the tenants shall sign a lease addendum agreeing to the above mentioned terms. Budget and financial implications: if the current lease arrangements are extended, the city will receive rent revenue not currently accounted for in the 2020 budget. However, operating expenses for the building will also increase. The 2020 capital budget has an approved amount of $350,000 for the community services building and site demolition capital project number 2013623. And back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, City Clerk. I'll look to council for questions or comments. Councillor Torsen.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess this question's through the city manager to the city clerk. One of the things you mentioned is that the revenue will be higher, but expenses will also be higher. So, it's my perception from what I know of this building that, now that it's even less occupied, this will be, I'm assuming, operating at a loss.
I'm not aware of the current expenses, but I could get that information and come back to you, Councillor Torsen. I could bring it back to council.
I don't have the amount in front of me, but I know overall the building itself takes a loss in the year.
If I recall, it took a loss under normal circumstances.
That's correct.
And now we're talking about continuing operations with a very limited amount of kind of utilization. So the revenue coming in is even lower. So given everything that's going on, I think it's fair to allow, an extension to these days that we're discussing based on inability to find something, difficulty actually physically moving during the kind of COVID social distancing kind of period. So I think that there's good kind of evidence to support doing something like this and doing the right thing in this case. But also I think it should be acknowledged that, by continuing to operate it for this handful of groups, that this is in a way a financial contribution to those groups, because we are, increasing the losses that we'll be taking purely for the sake of giving these groups a chance to stay a little bit longer.
Thank you, Councillor Torsen. I believe administration's working on trying to find a little more detail. Councillor Diachuk, I acknowledge you. You have the floor.
Okay. Thanks, Your Worship. And my audio on?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. So I think there's some assumptions in extension of the lease that are important to tease out in here. And I think the assumption is that COVID-19 will be out of the way. And if that's being perceived as a barrier for June 30th, that somehow in a few months that barrier won't exist. And my question is, I guess, is that if that barrier of COVID-19 continues to exist, are we going to be now delayed even further because that barrier is going to present and we'll be back at the table again saying, well, geez, I can't move, I can't hire anybody, I can't do anything. So my challenge in all this is there's a lot of unknowns around this piece. And I'm concerned because I guess we're using COVID-19 as a rationale when you've had a year to plan and just anticipate finding space. I'm pleased to see that within the agreement, in the event there are some failures within the building itself, that we have the option to simply say it's done and out you go. But I am equally as concerned by the rationale now that COVID-19 is preventing us from moving. So how long is that potential for it to exist? Or is there an end date that says drop dead date, regardless of COVID-19, you have to move out? So I don't feel like that I can buy that because there's nothing that guarantees it.
Point well taken, Councillor. Councillor Baker, you have the floor.
On, Your Worship.
There you are, Councillor, you're on.
Thank you. I guess I look at it this way. We have all kinds of policies. And I've said many times that some of these policies and things we do don't suit every situation all the time. And we're in a unique situation here. Right now, I don't believe there's anything really happening in the construction association or the related businesses. I'm not sure how many people are left even connected to that association because of the downturn. There's virtually no construction going on in our city. And I would think, and I don't know this for a fact, but that's pretty thin, the people that are supporting that association. And they've looked after and provided services committee for a long time. And the end date is not changed from what I understand from what you said. And I haven't read that email. But the 2 months isn't going to break the city. And the deadline was whatever date it was. Help me out there. I can't remember the deadline.
So originally, we proposed, it was passed for June 30th of 2020. So
Right.
What's being proposed is an extension of 3 months, Councillor Baker.
Okay. So if we help them out for 2 or 3 months, and then that's all over, it's all over. That's what they've asked for. And I think that's a pretty small thing from an industry that supports the city in a big way when there's something to do and has for the last probably 25 or 30 years. So putting policy aside and what we should have done or what they should have done really isn't important to me. I think everybody's looking for help at every level, at every industry, and every retail business. And unemployment, this should be no different. And if we can help them out for a couple of months free rent, we still have the clause that if the boiler breaks down, well, the boiler breaks down. So I'm in favor of granting this 2-month extension or whatever it is and get on with the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Baker. I appreciate the comments from Council. I think that we are in a unique situation. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Diachuk, and I agree with you from the perspective that if when we have to say enough is enough, and I think that's fair. And I hear what Councillor Baker has said and what Councillor Torsen has said, and I think that by coming up with a 3-month extension saying you have up till the end of September 30th or sooner, and also with the provision that administration has proposed saying that if the boiler breaks down or reaches its end of life before the end of September, we may have to close that building sooner anyways, because there is some significant concerns around some items such as the boiler, and that's been identified for some time. So I think that that's the question that we try to address and ensure that from the public's perspective, we may actually continue to lose money a little bit on this building as the next 3 months as we have in the past. Nothing's changed from that perspective. But if the tenants are prepared to sign a month-to-month, basically with that addendum in place, from that perspective, knowing that the end of September, the doors will be shut, and that will be it. I can support that. I think that from the perspective that we're trying to be as accommodating as we can be as a landlord, and I would look to other landlords in the community. I'm hearing stories where people are being as accommodating as they can be. So being a good landlord in this case, even though that's not the business what we want to be in, that's where we are. And I think that if the building is emptied by the end of August, terrific. It may be the end of September, but come the end of September, it has to be emptied. That's Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, I did just one more quick thing, I guess, after hearing Councillor Baker's comment about, there really is a question is how much activity is going on. I mean, when we look at a number of other businesses, and I'll just use the college as a case in point, 99.9% of the employees are working from home. This might even be an opportunity for them to save money by actually working from home as well. So if they're looking at it from a business model, I mean, I'm looking, it's the different organizations that are in there and how much interaction actually occurs in there in view of even COVID and making sure that you maintain the physical space and the likes. I don't know. I don't know how they're operating, and maybe they are operating from home now at this point. But that's another piece behind all this as well, if you're using COVID as that argument. So I'm not opposed to extending it, but I guess I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, if the argument is being used, COVID's being used as the argument, and really if they wanted to save money, is it possible for people to work at home and not pay the rent as well? So, I mean, I'm surprised that option hasn't been put on the table.
I believe if I could speak from talking to various businesses and maybe some including the chamber, a lot of people are doing that, or exploring that. So I think that the new way of business as we are seeing it today throughout the community, just not at the potential residents or tenants of the community services building, that's happening more and more. So I suspect that may be something that comes into play very soon, if not completely sooner. City Manager.
Just to clarify, some of the reasoning behind the extension also included the ability to get some of the potential leasehold improvements at their new building, as well as moving companies to come in. So that was, it wasn't, at least the emails I received were not so much around the working from home and such like that. I believe they have taken some of those measures in terms of reduced hours and things like that. But I think it was more around the ability to complete the leasehold tenants or improvements that were needed at their potential new locations, as well as the moving portion of it. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. I'll ask for direction from Council on 6.2.1 Community Services Lease Extension Request. Councillor Fagnan. Nope, we'll get you turned on there in a second. There you are, Councillor. Oh, had you.
Here we go.
There we are.
I move that Council approve extending the current lease agreements of the remaining community services building tenants, being the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce, Lloydminster Clinic, Lloydminster Construction Association, Lloydminster Learning Council, and MS Society, with the City of Lloydminster at the current lease rates for spaces in the community service building located at 4419 52nd Ave to September 30th, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder? Councillor Diachuk. Is there any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried.
Mayor Alberts, Councillor Baker, I believe, was trying to say something there,
Okay.
and he
Sorry.
was muted, so I could be
Okay.
wrong, but
Councillor Baker.
I'm just trying to understand the Councillor Fagnan's motion.
So the motion that was moved and seconded, Councillor, was that we would extend the lease for up to 3 months on the building, for the current tenants. Is what I understood. City Clerk, correct me
Okay,
if I'm
but
wrong.
what's their request?
Well, we've had several requests, Councillor, we've had different requests. So we had a request up to a whole year for an extension. So,
Worship by me, we were talking about the email that Dorothy sent over.
well, there's been several bits of communication, and that was the latest that had arrived just at lunchtime today, Councillor. So this work was done prior to that email coming, but there was an email prior from the Lloydminster Construction Association. So we've had communications with a few of the leaseholders.
Okay, they've asked us to eliminate the rent, right?
That was the latest request that was received today.
But that's not on the table.
That was not put forward on the table today.
Well, that was what I wanted to get to, your worship, if I may.
Okay, if I could just give
It's
you
a point of
Councillor
order.
Baker.
I would, if it's a point of order, and I don't know where I'm at, but our city clerk can help us out. I was trying to understand what we were doing there,
Okay.
and I would like to see that amended to rent-free with the conditions that you outlined just a few minutes ago, your worship. I might be too late, but
So if I may, given the current circumstances that Councillor Baker was trying to speak when the question was called and it's seconded, then I think that we could adjust to say that the vote could be redone, or he could ask for a friendly amendment. Whether council would like to accept that or not, I'm not sure.
Thank you, City Clerk. I saw the City Manager first, and then I'll get to Councillor Diachek. So I'll start with City Manager, sir.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, the original request that was sent in when this report was put forth did include a request for waiving of rent, as well as there was a couple different requests. There was one for the end of 2020, December 31st, and there was another one for June 30th of 2021. And so that was the request brought in. So the motion that's put forward has the extension to September 30th as well, but at the current lease rates. And so there was a request originally for the waiving of the lease fees. The email that we received before lunch talked about the possibility of reducing the time in the building until the end of July, but that's only one group. There we have 3 other groups that are potentially needing till the end of September, or sorry, they requested till the end of December or June of 2021, and so that's where we come up with still September 30th and rent at the current rate. So we have to remember, if we give one group, just a comment, if we give one group the lease fees at no charge, we'd have to make sure we do the same for all 4 or 5 groups that are still in the building. Just wanted to clarify.
Councillor Diachek, you had a comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Your Worship. I guess that was going to be the concern that I have as well, is that we have other facilities as well that are being rented out. And if we provide a rent-free environment for one building or 4 people that are renting, to what degree are we obliged to begin applying that same principle to people that are leasing from service at this point as well? So for me, there's a need for caution relative to how we open that particular door up. And so, I mean, I think the other part of confusion around this is that each group is sort of asking one thing and then another thing. But I think it's important to keep the context that there has been information available for a year for people to get organized and put all this together. I recognize the circumstances change and there are challenges around that. But I guess if you open the door for 4 tenants, then how many other tenants do you open the door for?
Councillor Baker.
well, your worship, we're not tearing all their buildings down. There's a difference. these guys are being kicked out
Well,
because we have to, not kicked out, but removed from the building.
they are, Councillor, and I guess that from the perspective, and again, I'll look to the city clerk to clarify, it's not that we broke a lease. First of all, as the lease, as the renter, or sorry, as the owner of the building, we didn't break a lease with anyone, and we gave them a year's notice. And I think that's the two factors that are important. I realize they are being asked to leave, but it's if the building was in better shape, I don't think we'd be having this discussion. I think that's what triggered the whole question, is that perspective of that building. And I just want to clarify that, City Clerk, if you wouldn't mind, if you could.
Absolutely, Your Worship. All parties were given ample notice to vacate the building by the end of June of this year. Some of the tenants that were in the building have already left. Others, and these particular ones, have not had an opportunity. And the COVID-19 situation has hampered their abilities to move or complete the work on their other lease spaces.
Your Worship, if I may, just to close, if I could, the fact that Councillor Fragment had mentioned that the private enterprise is forgiving rent to their tenants in some cases, as he's mentioned, realtor wine vendors conversation. We're in the business whether we like it or not. And if we request administration to have a talk with the existing tenants that are left in the building that aren't really relocated yet, we could reconsider in order at our next council meeting. We could reconsider this motion.
We could, Councillor Baker, as concerned as Councillor, I think it was expressed by City Manager Mike and Councillor Diachuk. My concern is, as soon as we enter that slope, and I'll call it a slope, we open ourselves up for every renter in the community, and there's more than the Service Sports Center, as Councillor Diachuk alluded to. So I'm hesitant to. I realize the difficulties that people are in, the businesses are in, but at the same time, we just made this decision in particular a year ago, before COVID, before a lot of the things that we're facing today, and trying to be realistic. And I thought that by coming 3 months, we've given them an extension that most people wouldn't receive from that perspective. And I thought that that's my feeling, is that we've come a part of the way. Can we come any more than that? It becomes a fiscal effect to every taxpayer in the city, is my concern. So I know you had mentioned it, based on City Clerk, go ahead.
I just want to remind council that there is a motion on the floor.
Yes. So Councillor Baker, you mentioned a friendly amendment. I will leave it in your hands if that's what you so wish.
If I may, through to our city clerk, the motion is on the floor to reconsider at our next meeting, which is 2 weeks ago, I believe, 2 weeks from today, if need be. Do you need to serve a notice of motion?
Well, we have a motion on the floor. Council would have to vote on that motion that's on the floor. And then
Okay,
if that motion is defeated, administration could bring it back. Or if it's the will of council, you could add afterwards, you could request a motion that the item be brought back for review.
you could have a reconsider after the motion.
Yeah, you could ask council, and it would be a decision of council whether you could put a motion on the floor that item be brought back for review in 2 weeks, but that would be would be up to council.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I've got Councillor Monroe.
Yeah. Can you just repeat the exact motion that's on the floor, please? I'm getting a little bit off track with everything.
Yeah, I could read the motion. The motion is the council approve extending the current lease agreements of the remaining community service building tenants being the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce, Lloydminster Clinic, Lloydminster Construction Association, Lloydminster Learning Council, and the MS Society with the City of Lloydminster at the current lease rates for spaces in the Community Services Building located at 4419 52nd Avenue to September 30th, 2020. And I'll remind Council that Councillor Baker at the time of the vote was trying to respond to the mayor for the questions. So we're asking the council understands that, and that if there is a further vote on that, so Councillor Baker did respond to that moment.
Thank you, City Clerk. Is there any more discussion before I call for the question to vote on this motion? Not Councillor Torsen.
Oh, am I muted? Am I muted?
There you are. You're good, Councillor Torsen.
Are we voting on the original motion or some amendment made by Councillor Baker?
On the original motion is what I'm looking at right now.
Ah, okay.
All right. All clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Tora Monroe, did you want to speak again?
Yeah, sorry. So just to be sure, Councillor Baker did not make any amendment to that motion, correct?
I did not note an amendment to
Okay.
that motion.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about the confusion.
Not a problem.
Your worship,
Yes, Councillor Baker.
if I may. And the reason I didn't amend it, because there's 5 parties involved. And the motion or the report that came forward from the Lloyd Construction Association. And I think it's important that if we do for one, we have to talk to all of them for sure. And the question is, that's why I did not make an amendment,
Okay.
because we didn't hear from the other 4 parties.
Fair enough, Councillor. I appreciate that. And that was at the, that was received just prior to the beginning of this meeting. All right. I'm looking around. I don't see any other questions, hands up to speak. So I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of the motion as presented?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Carried. Moving on to 6.2.2. I'll look to the city manager.
Your worship,
Oh, certainly.
I'm sorry. Now that you've passed your motion, when do you want me to bring forward a reconsider motion?
City clerk, if you can advise here.
Well, Councillor Baker, you could ask us at any future meeting, or you could ask council to consider that now.
Well, I would like it today, because if we're going to talk about it, it's 2 weeks today. Is that right? I don't have my calendar right in front of me.
Yes, I believe you're right, Councillor Baker. The next meeting is planned for May 4th.
May 4th.
Okay. If it's in order, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider this on May 4th with provision. Is that in order?
I'm going to look to the city clerk. Is
So
that
what's the motion you would like to make, Councillor?
I'd like just to make a motion that after administration talks to the 5 groups over there, they bring back a short report and see how they're all making out. So then we can have the background on those 5 groups, and we can reconsider the motion we just made today at the May 4th council meeting. You put it in your legalistic words.
So you would like council to reconsider its determination today, is what you're asking?
I voted against termination.
I understand, Councillor. So your motion would be that administration bring back a future report to council that would, and I'm not sure what that recommendation you're asking us for within there. So you're asking us to bring back a future motion to council, reconsidering the motion that was passed today?
No, yeah, yes, yes, to reconsider the motion we passed today, if necessary.
Okay, I believe we've captured.
You've captured that. Thank you, city clerk. I'll look for a seconder. I'll call a second time for a seconder. Call a third time for a seconder. And I believe the motion dies without a seconder, does it not, City Clerk?
That's correct, Your Worship.
So we don't have a seconder, Councillor Baker, so the
Oh,
motion.
that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for helping us with that, City Clerk. Moving on to 6.2.2, City Manager. Oh, we'll get you the mic there, City Manager, in just a second.
Sorry.
There we go.
Sorry. For item 6.2.2, Fire Hall 1 site selection, I'll ask Lease Sawicki to present our fire chief.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon.
We're bringing forth a recommendation on the site selection for the replacement of the current downtown fire hall. Recommendation is that Council approve the new fire hall number 1 location at 3752 47th Street. The issue, due to the fire service deployment changes, the current fire hall number 1 location has outgrown its use for current fire service operations. This requires the construction of a new facility to meet the needs of the department and the residents of the city. Some background: on March 13th, 2020, Dillon Consulting completed an analysis of 2 potential sites provided by the city for the proposed relocation of fire hall number 1. The methodology used utilizes a road-based geographical information system model to assess the Lloydminster Fire Services response coverage capabilities. The Dillon Consulting report was complemented by a further study of the 2 sites conducted by administration. 2 site locations analyzed were 3752 47th Street and 4419 52nd Avenue. Of these 2 locations, it was determined that 3752 47th Street provided the best site for the proposed new hall for the Lloydminster Fire Services. It was noted that both sites meet the critical NFPA testing related to the ability for fire service equipment to be on scene at a residential fire in under 10 minutes, 80% of the time. They were both close to the main response routes. The preferred site consists of 7 acres in comparison to the downtown location having only 1.5 acres. The large site allows for the opportunity to ensure that future growth and training opportunities are capitalized on. Options to Council are to approve the new location at 3752 47th Street, or to approve the new location at 4419 52nd Avenue, or Council requests further information and that the item be brought forward to a future regular Council meeting. Take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Fire Chief. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Chief, for the report. I think it's just some comments I would make on this. There's a few really good reasons why this would be the site that's selected. First of all is overall growth capacity. So being able to have, should we decide a training center or something associated with that, if the space is there. If we decide that, the utilization of that space won't affect residential properties. And these are good things. Responding to calls from this location doesn't mean that we're going right through the middle of 49th anymore, up through residential areas. So it should be better for the community as far as sirens and everything else that go along with it. If you look at the report and you look at what's on the screen there now, you'll note that north, south, and west are very accessible and should work very, very well for getting everywhere we need to get within the related times that are required for a fire department to respond. So I think all the research that's gone into this is very effective. It speaks to this location being the best one, and I would be in favor of that. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Buckingham. Additional comments or questions? Councillor Torsen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just as far as the difference between the other locations we've considered, this one to me has a lot more value to the city based on the size of the parcel and based on location. The other one has, we'll say, intrinsic value, being that it is highway frontage and everything else that could be used for other purposes related to the city potentially, or to consider selling to a private developer. So going with this one too, financially, you know, if from a service perspective is all the same or better for the fire service, that's, you know, to me a win-win. because now we've got an opportunity with the old community services building, once it's empty, to do something with it. Which I think if we were just to put a fire hall there, if it was the best one from a service perspective, sure, we should consider it. But considering this one is better, I think it's an easy choice.
Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I think I just add one small piece because I support everything that's been said. I think the shape of the lot as well, the one off 44th is really limiting in many ways relative to how you structure the building and put it on in place. It's a long, narrow piece of property, and I think that would have some impact in terms of design and functionality relative to a fire station, and most critically, the ability to grow. There's no room to grow there, period. So we know that the city is going to grow. We've seen the growth studies, and once the economy gets rolling again and things get back on track, down the road, the city will grow and it will need expanded service. And certainly, as the fire chief has pointed out, that, and everybody else has supported, that need for training and being able to do it itself will be, I think, something people look back upon and say was a wise decision.
Thank you, Councillor Diachuk. Chief, the proposed property at 3752 47th Street, is that what you would call a clear field? There's nothing there impeding construction, versus the other property currently is occupied with a building?
Correct. The downtown location has a building on it, and the east end location is a clear piece of property.
Okay. Who owns the east portion, east property being proposed for construction?
I can answer that question, Your Worship. That's currently city property that we.
City property. Okay. Yeah. So they're both city properties that were considered, that were available.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Buckingham.
I'd be prepared to make the motion if that's
I
acceptable.
will entertain that motion at this time.
I move the council approve the new fire hall number 1 location at 3752 47th Street, Lloydminster, Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Torsen. Any further discussion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 6.4, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 6.4.1, the Lloydminster Public Library Transition Plan, I'll ask Don Stanca, Director Manager of Community Development and Operations, to present.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Council. Before you, we have the Lloydminster Public Library Transition Plan. Administration's looking for a recommendation in 4 parts. Number 1, that Council direct administration to negotiate determination of the lease agreement for the Lloydminster Public Library space with Service Credit Union. Just to add a point of clarity before I move on to points 2, 3, and 4, the current lease expires at the end of August of 2020. What we would be looking to negotiate with the termination there is a potential month-to-month until such time the library is ready, or the new location is ready to be moved in. So again, that current lease expires in August of 2020 of this year. Number 2, that Council direct administration and negotiate entering into a lease agreement with the Lloyd Mall to provide space for the Lloydminster Public Library's relocation. Number 3, that Council direct administration to bring forward a bylaw to establish the Lloydminster Municipal Library Board pursuant to the Libraries Act of Alberta. And the final recommendation administration is seeking is that Council direct administration and the Lloydminster Public Library Board to engage in community consultation to provide members of the public with information on the future of the Lloydminster Public Library. Some background, our city of Lloydminster entered into an agreement for the Lloydminster Public Library to lease space in the Service Credit Union for a 5-year term commencing September 1st of 2015. And that, as I stated earlier, expires on August 31st, 2020. The Lloydminster Public Library has leased space in the lower level of the Atrium Center since 1992. Of late, concerns have risen with the current location of the library. Some of these include parking, security, accessibility, mechanical HVAC, freight elevator issues. The library is located in the basement of the atrium center, which poses a risk to flooding of the library. And there is significant costs associated with renovating the current space, as the space has not been renovated since established in 1992. During recent discussion between Lloydminster Public Library Board and the City of Lloydminster administration, it has been determined that it is in the best interest for the library to move from its current location at the Atrium Center, located 5010 49th Street, Lloydminster, Alberta, to a new location at the Lloyd Mall, 5211 44th Street in Lloydminster, Alberta. Moving the physical location of the library will open up new opportunities for the current and future patrons, and redevelopment will inspire current and future programming needs for the community. Additional benefits for recommending the library's relocation included, but are not limited to, ample parking, providing patrons with the ability to do multitask while at the library, as well as attending the library facility. No accessibility issues. Everything is on ground accessible and not located in the basement. The Lloyd Mall upgraded infrastructure in 2016. It creates new collaborative spaces that includes updated multimedia opportunities and the added benefit of safety and security that the Lloyd Mall offers to patrons and staff. Just to go a little bit further into the governance, the Lloydminster Public Library's current model consists of the library board that provides oversight, head librarian, who is the administrative head, and staff that are responsible for service delivery. The Lloydminster Public Library is not considered a municipal library pursuant to the Alberta Saskatchewan legislation, as no bylaw exists setting the board. Council does appoint board members, and City Council member does sit on the board. However, City Council has no authority to change or remove this board. During the City of Lloydminster 2020 budget deliberations, Council approved funding in the amount of $874,325 for the operating costs for the Lloyd Public Library. Currently, only acts spoken to in Section 8 of the Lloydminster Charter apply to the whole City of Lloydminster. The remainder are provincially based. The Lloyd Charter is silent on the choice of library acts that the city should follow. Therefore, the library's physical location determines the provincial jurisdiction in which the library falls under. The Lloydminster Public Library is currently located in the province of Alberta and therefore should follow the Libraries Act of Alberta. The Lloydminster Public Library Board and City of Lloydminster administration have been working collaboratively to come up with a governance model that will be beneficial to the Lloydminster Public Library and its patrons now and into the future. Changing the Lloydminster Public Library to governance model through bylaw pursuant to the Libraries Act of Alberta would enable City Council to establish the Municipal Library Board. The established board would be governing board, not an advisory board, unlike other nonprofit boards formed under other legislations. The Libraries Act of Alberta states the library board is the corporation that has full management and control of the library. The library's organizational structure would be such that the board appointed by City Council would report to Council and the librarian would report to the library board. The board will be most active in evaluating results and planning. Furthermore, the library would continue to operate for the benefit of the public, and the library board members are therefore required to act in the interest of the public. From a branding perspective, the Lloydminster Library Board and City of Lloydminster administration will work collaboratively on branding and rollout for the newly established Lloydminster Library Municipal Library. There's a couple options for Council that they approve the 4 recommendations or that Council requests additional information brought forward. It's in alignment with the strategic plan, public library and legislative compliance, encouraging strong and supportive relationship between the library board in the city of Lloydminster that recognizes and prioritizes public library service. Governance implications. Administration will bring forward a bylaw for council consideration for the formation of the Lloydminster Municipal Library Board pursuant to the Libraries Act of Alberta. And the final budget implications, recreation and culture. So funding for the design, construction, and fit up of the library in the new space being sought after by administration. Estimated cost is $1.5 million to do that. The funds for that are approved in our 2020 capital budget under project number 207600. And I'll pass it back to your worship, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Stang. Questions or comments? Councillor Baker. I think you're live, Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much. Your worship, I think this is a good move for the city and the people of our community. The basement area of any building is the last place libraries would be recommended to operate out of because of the potential for flooding. And of course, we had a flooded basement, you know what would happen. I think that the lighting and the parking area, I don't know if it's free over there at the mall, but we'll go along with that. But there's lots of parking and good location. People that are at the mall, we know the kids will go in the library, and some of the families when they're there and probably get a lot more exposure than we're getting now. So to me, it's nothing but a win-win. The one thing I wanted to ask, one question to Executive Manager Don, we talked about a 5-year lease. Are we going to have an option for another 5 or 5 and 5 or just in case?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The city, typically we enter into 5-year lease agreements. We are looking for long-term, so whether that's a 5-year with an option to extend for another 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that's something we will be having conversation with the leaser or the Lloydminster Mall.
Perfect.
We're looking for a longer-term lease. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, and thank you, Executive Manager Stang. I see Councillor Monroe.
Just multiple comments, I guess, to echo some of the things that Director Stang said in terms of the positives for ample free parking, provide patrons with the ability to run other errands. Then there's no accessibility issues, security issues. I think we can make that list longer and longer as time goes on. I feel as though the return for investment that the city is investing in the library versus the location that they're currently in and the location that they're moving into is going to, I think we'll at least see double on what the city is getting for the investment, just because it's going to have a lot more foot traffic, accessibility to the public is there. I want to thank all of administration and for the library board as well for, I don't think the communication lines between the Lloydminster Public Library Board and the city have ever been more open than they currently are. The collaboration that City Council has had the conversations with the library board and administration as well to really be moving this forward for our community. And in terms of recreation or anything for the cultural part of anything, we haven't really moved the ball on a whole lot in this term as council. So I know Councillor Torsen was mentioning that the other day in one of our meetings that we had. And I think, it's time that we need to, they've been in the basement of a building since 1992. And whether or not we do this relocation or if we were to put the money into the current library that they're in, there needs to be extreme renovations for even where they were going to currently stay. So I'm definitely in favor of the relocation. And I do think that, there was money budgeted, not necessarily for this specific project, but there was money set aside in our budget through our process that we were doing in the fall. So I, again, just want to thank everyone. And I really do think that for our community, this is 1 step or 2 steps forward for sure.
Councillor Fagnan. I'll just get your mic up and running.
I'm good there. Yeah, I would echo what both councillors have said there. I hate to spend 1.3 million or 1.5 on a building that we're not going to own, but at the end of the day, it's been down there for 20 years. I've been down, looked at it. I commend the staff and the management and the board for all their patience over these years. It's supposed to be happening, and finally it is. So I think I'm going to really look forward to that. I think it's a great move by our city, and love the location. I think I'm very much for this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Torsen. There
Thank
you
you,
are.
Your Worship. So yeah, I very much am looking forward to a potential change here. I think in terms of quality of product, for the amount of money you're spending, we're going to get a way better product out of it. And for the dollar value, I think that there's good value, especially if we can extend the lease longer, and that makes that 1.3 million or 1.5 million almost extend itself even farther as far as leasehold improvements go. But just looking at it and where we are and where we've come from is, there was a time where I think it was one of our first motions as a city council was to cancel a debenture on a project for the library that was going to cost upwards of $27 million or 24 million, whatever the number was when all the smoke cleared on that project. And now we're talking about getting them into a new home, which I would say is semi-permanent. We'll see what happens in the future, but at the same time, I think that this is going to do all the things that was mentioned by the other councillors. So it's going to improve foot traffic. It's going to be a better quality of product. It's going to be something that we can be proud of. That's going to improve quality of life for people in the city. There are a lot of people who like to play sports and things like that, but that's not for everyone. And there's different things you can do with a new modern library that maybe we've never been able to do before, and maybe we've never been able to get the foot traffic in to make them good value for the city. So I'm looking forward to it. I think that there's going to be a great opportunity here to move the needle on quality of life in the city and to create something better than we've ever had before. So looking forward to it. The only question is the kind of the operating costs on top of it, like what the increase will be, but I guess we'll find that out as we get closer to, in terms of having a final price on the leasehold improvements. But even looking at the financial statements for what they were paying with common costs and lease costs before, it's not going to be too crazy as far as I can see, as far as the increased costs for operations. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Councillor Torsen. Councillor Monroe, I acknowledge you, and you have the floor.
Sure. Just one other comment that I forgot to make in my last statement as well was, it's also going to be creating jobs for whether those are Albertans or Saskatchewans. Hopefully we'll be able to, whatever format, I guess, moving forward for that does, whatever timelines that is, coming out of this COVID-19, people are going to be wanting to get back to work as soon as possible. So I think that that's also the benefit of some of this as well, is that, we are going to hopefully, this renovation and relocation will potentially be creating some jobs that our community is really going to be needing as well. So,
thank you, Councillor Monroe. I've got Executive Manager Stang going to Councillor Diachek after that. But Executive Manager Stang.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to add, there's an attached transition plan to the admin report. It kind of lays out where we're going. So April would be negotiating both the termination and a new lease. In May, we'll bring forward the bylaw for council consideration to establish the Lloydminster board, municipal board. In May, approve a plan for the new space. So looking through design, procuring for the architectural drawings and putting out a tender package for construction. August, we'd be looking at public consultation to inform what we're planning and where we're going. And then August, rolling out the new branding, and Q4, hopefully construction being completed, moving into the new space. And then just one last comment in regards to Councillor Torsen's comment around operating cost. We will see an increase in rate, obviously, moving from the basement of a building into the main floor in the Lloydminster Library. There is going to be a different lease rate with regards to that. We've looked at that, and when you factor in all the other parameters, cost of security, risk to public and staff, we feel that it's still more advantageous to move into a new location than stay in our current location.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stang. I've got Councillor Diachuk, and I'll come back to Councillor Torsen and Monroe. So Councillor Diachuk, and thank you, Councillor Buckingham. I've also got you now. Go ahead,
All right.
Councillor Diachuk.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a quick question. In the costs that we're looking at, lease improvements and moving, will this include signage internally and externally? And I'm just wondering if there's any thought, how people in the public driving by would be able to know that the public library's there.
Executive Manager Stang.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, that's something I guess still needs to be fleshed out. Our budget was full inclusive, so it would include any signage. Not sure what that looks like from on the road versus inside the mall versus advertising versus social media. So those are still parameters we need to work with the Lloydminster Library Board and administration and sort out and bring those forward as we develop this project.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Torsen since he caught my eye first, and I'll work my way around. Councillor Torsen. And you have.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I just wanted to say that, I believe that whatever increase in operating costs that there will be, because I do know that, you're going to pay higher value for a higher value property, essentially. I really believe that those are going to be well worth it in terms of the volume, in terms of the number of people who are going to be going there and the increased usage, as well as the improved product that's being put out there overall. So I really do think that we are really raising the bar on the services that the Lloydminster Public Library is offering simply by moving its location and putting it out front and center to where people already are, and getting them getting it more visible in the community, in the mall, and yeah, getting that foot traffic, as well as some of the things we've heard from the library board as far as the types of service they'll be offering and the multimedia and different things like that are a little more attributed to a modern library rather than simply a collection of books. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Monroe, and then to Councillor Buckingham.
Sure. This question's maybe perhaps more to the city clerk or to Executive Manager Stang. In terms of when we roll into, if it does pass, the municipal library form, will all of those terms for the current people that are on the board, will they all roll back to day one? Like, will this be a new day one stepping forward? Or if someone's been on the library board for 3 years, will that history be there? I'm just wondering how that's going to be working.
I suppose as we get to the bylaw and the appointment of terms, those discussions will also have to happen with the individuals to see if they'd like to continue on. We'd likely probably want to stagger some of the terms so we don't have everybody's term expiring at the same time. So we may have some longer lengths of term and some shorter lengths of term that we bring forward. We'll adopt the bylaw first, and then we'll work with the library board to establish what terms they'd like to see for their extensions.
And so would some of those things just be mentioned in the MOU that we will have with them?
As part of the bylaw, the bylaw would set the term for the board, and then we would go to the board and determine what they would like to see for their terms. Once again, we'd like to stagger those so that we don't have everybody's term expiring at once.
Absolutely, makes complete sense. Thank you very much.
Moving over to Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure about any other councillors or what they've been hearing or feeling in the community, or the correspondence or the phone calls they've been receiving about what's going on in the community. I certainly have been receiving them about what's the city doing to try and help businesses and help people through this current pandemic that's going on, and what is the city cutting out of their budgets, and what are we going to do to decrease taxes, and all the things that we're going forward on here. This library is long overdue, something that's been promised to those people for a very, very long time, and something that's good for the community. I just wondered if Executive Manager Stang or anyone like that could speak to what this current situation might actually end up being a positive, whether it's lease negotiations or any of that stuff, because perhaps this might be looked upon negatively in the community by some, spending this or investing this money right now in this year and this term. So, you know, I have a very strong feeling it's the right thing to do, but I wondered if you might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Buckingham. I do see it as a positive, and I think some of the council has talked about how long the library has been on the table for conversation to find a new home and to reestablish the library in our community. So I guess from the first part, I think this will provide the community, you know, as our current situation starts to relax and people start getting out in the community, it'll provide a place where the community come gather. There'll be enhanced programming delivered through the public library, an opportunity for kids to collaborate and work on some unique programs delivered there. As well as I think with the construction, obviously there's going to need to be some work done to the space that the city and the library board are looking to lease at the Lloyd Mall. So there's going to be an injection in some capital funds to drive jobs. I don't have the numbers on the top of my head about how many jobs it would create, but I would assume there's going to be construction crews coming in to build the specific areas, to fit up the library, potential for other businesses to bid on some of the fit up, the furniture, the cabinets, the shelving, the electrical, the HVAC, whatever improvements are required there. So I personally see it as an injection of capital funds to potentially drive some jobs here in the city as well.
Yeah, thank you, Executive Manager Stang. I just wanted to have that discussion because, like I say, I've been receiving those calls about why is the city going ahead with this and why are you going ahead with that and what are you cutting? And I wanted to have that positive conversation about this particular move because it does do positive things for the community long term. It does do positive things for the community short term. So I just wanted to have that discussion. Thanks for your candidness on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baker, I'll take, and then Councillor Diachuk from Councillor Monroe. So Councillor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. The important thing to know at this time, as we move ahead with this project, it's been on the books for 24 years, I can tell you that.
Thank you, Councillor. I knew you'd bring some to fill
we have
in.
an opportunity to get to space now where in the last 10 years, we couldn't have got space like that because it wasn't available. Another important factor is when it comes to costs, if we don't get good costs to do the renovations now, I don't know when you'll get a better time to buy if you're looking for a better deal. So I think it does several things that's been mentioned, and I won't go into them, but what's important is I think we're going to get a good fair market value for the work we need done. And probably at the end of the day, and there's no way to measure this now, but there will be some fairly major savings compared to 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it's a step forward for the community. It's a positive rather than shut the place down. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Diachuk and then Councillor Monroe.
Your Worship.
Certainly.
Yeah, sorry, just Your Worship, just to speak to that. When we entered into that lease agreement 5 years ago, the intent at that time was we'd be moving into a new location prior to the end of this lease. So Councillor Baker is 100% correct. It's been a long time in the process, and I think the timing is perfect. Not only with the library, will also generate more foot traffic. I'm getting good points brought forward by my counterparts here. It will drive more foot traffic to the Lloyd Mall as well. Hopefully, will benefit both the library and other businesses there as well.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Diachuk, you do have the floor.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Some of the things I wanted to say have just been said, and I think it's important to also highlight to remain in the place that we're at. We'd have to upgrade lighting and so on and so forth. So there's a cost to stay where we're at in order to achieve a particular standard, and there's a cost to move. And I would think that if we were going to be investing money, I would rather it be in terms of making a positive move under the circumstances we are, rather than trying to extend a lease and put sort of bandages on things that are inevitably down the road we're going to leave.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Monroe.
I'm prepared to make a motion if no one else has any further comments.
I think I was going to, everything that I was going to say has been said, so I will entertain a motion, Councillor.
That council direct administration to negotiate the termination of the lease agreement for the Lloydminster Public Library space with the Service Credit Union. Number 2, that council direct administration to negotiate entering into a lease agreement with the Lloyd Mall to provide space for the Lloydminster Public Library's relocation.
Your worship.
Wrong one?
Those are separate motions. If we could treat them as
Oh,
Okay.
okay, sorry.
Nope, no problem. I was also on the understanding we could go with right, 4 recommendations. All
Sorry,
right.
number 1 then.
Number 1, I see your hand up, Councillor Fagnan. It's the second. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Fagnan. So all in, any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any, all in favor.
Thank you, Your worship.
Opposed, carried. Councillor Monroe, if you would, please.
That council direct administration to negotiate entering into a lease agreement with the Lloyd Mall to provide space for the Lloydminster Public Library's relocation.
Thank you. I'll look for a seconder from Council. Councillor Torsen, thank you very much. Any further discussion on this motion? Not seeing any, all in favor?
Thank you, Your worship.
Opposed, carried. Back to you, Councillor Monroe.
That council direct administration to bring forward a bylaw to establish the Lloydminster Municipal Library Board pursuant to the Libraries Act of Alberta.
Look to Council for a seconder. Councillor Diachuk, thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your worship.
Opposed, carried. Councillor Monroe.
And that council direct administration and the library and the Lloydminster Public Library Board to engage in community consultation to provide members of the public with information on the future of the Lloydminster Public Library.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Torsen, thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your worship.
Opposed, carried. Thank you very much, Council, and thank you very much, Administration, for bringing this matter forward. And again, I don't want to dwell on it. 24 years is a long time. We've heard about this and had a lot of discussion as Council and Administration with the Library Board. And I'd like to thank the Library Board publicly for the work they've done, because that's been a great deal of work that they've put in on it and brought forward a great recommendation to Administration onto Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Your worship, and thank you, Council. In particular, the councillors that have sat on that board for the last couple of years. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to 6.5, I'll look to the City Manager.
Thank you, Your worship. For 6.5.1, Seasonal Garden Center is an accessory building for use in a DC2 direct control district. I'll ask Natasha Pitkawa from Planning to present.
Thank you, Your worship and Council. We're here to ask Council to approve the development of a seasonal garden center as an accessory building or use.
Sorry, I can't hear her. I'm getting lag.
Natasha, I'll ask Executive Manager Stang to present the item, and if you could stand by for questions. Executive Manager Stang, could you present that?
A little bit of an internet breakdown there.
Okay.
Thank you, Natasha. Executive Manager Stang, you're good there?
Yep. Give me a sec here. Alrighty, so bringing forward the Seasonal Garden Center and accessory building or use in a DC2 district direct control district. So administration's looking for council's recommendation to approve the development of a seasonal garden center as an accessory building or use within the DC2 direct control district located at 5027 44th Street, Lloydminster, Alberta, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, building permit is required to be issued and approved for this development. Number 2, construction shall meet all federal, provincial, and municipal regulations, bylaw, codes, and statutes that apply And number 3, that the structure is to be removed at the end of the 2020 season. Background: during the April 14th, 2020 Governance and Priority Committee meeting, administration informed the committee that an application was received on February 28th, 2020, proposing the development of a temporary tent structure in the parking lot of 5027 44th Street, Lloydminster. The temporary tent structure is to be used as a seasonal garden center, and based on definitions within the land use bylaw number 5-2016, this would be classified as an accessory building and as listed as a permitted use. Since accessory buildings use is permitted use, there is not a requirement to advertise or mail letters to adjacent landowners. The intent of the development is to be used as a seasonal garden center on a temporary basis for the 2020 season. Since the subject lands are within a direct control district, final approval must be granted by City Council. I'll pass it back to your worship if there's any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stang, and thank you, Natasha, for staying with us. And I'll look to Council for questions or comments. Councillor Fragment. There you are.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. I had drove by the location there yesterday, and it looked like it was already set up. And just kind of curious on that, if it's like closing the door after the horses got out, or what the situation is there. I know also it's been up, they've been doing that for 20 years there, and I would like to take a look at that as from you, Natasha, with the DC2, with this direct control district. Does that have to come up every year? I mean, they've been doing it. Is there any way that we could do this on a 5-year basis just to save some time?
Yes, we have the ability, or council has the ability, to grant any length of approval they wish. Their application stated that this was only going to be used for a seasonal site, so that's why the application was brought forward as such. But if you guys wish to amend that, you definitely can.
Yeah, they've been doing it every spring. They've got it set up for the last, over the last 20 years. So.
Yes.
And
I think,
correct. And at GPC, we did have a.
Your worship, what Natasha was going to say, that was discussed when we brought it forward at GPC. So since it's been brought to our attention that it may not have been handled appropriately in the past, we are now bringing this forward to council for consideration, as it is a direct control district, and the only way for us to permit the temporary structure is with council's approval. So we can definitely look at bringing forward more long-term resolution to this, or we can continue to deal with it on an annual basis. I guess that will be at council's discretion.
I just take a look at it from the red tape side of things. If we can simplify things, much better than doing it on an annual basis. That's it, and it is already established.
I agree with you, Councillor Fagnan. And I think what I'd like to, if I could propose, and this wouldn't be a motion, but to send, based on the decision of council today, we could have administration go back to the application holder and suggest that they look at a longer term if they so wish. And the next time it comes forward, it could be for a window of what is reasonable that administration and that would consider to be reasonable, but 2, 3, 4 years, if that, even 5, if that's what they were thinking of doing, because it does indeed make a process, and as we'll likely talk about more through this meeting, if we can reduce red tape wherever we can. And that's a good point, Councillor Fagnan. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Baker.
Your worship, just past history. When you have a discretionary use, seasonal use, and if you extend it for 5 years, and something changes on the site. And a big site like that, there's several people leasing space or about purchasing space, one or the other, for their businesses. And this structure may or may not. I'm just giving you an example. End up in front of their place of business. 2 years after you give them a 5-year permit. That won't go over very well. So that's the reason, right or wrong, that they take 5 minutes and look at it every year. Because you have to consider what the site is today and what it could like 3 years from now. So it may change. And I can tell you, lots of people wouldn't want that in front of their business. So, thank you.
Good point, Councillor Baker. Thank you very much. That's food for thought. Any other comments or questions? Not seeing any. I will look for direction from council on 6.5.1 seasonal garden center as an accessory building. Councillor Diachuk, thank you.
I'll move that council approve the development of a seasonal garden center as an accessory building or use within the DC2 Direct Control District located at 5027-44th Street, Lloydminster, Alberta, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, building permit is required to be issued and approved for this development. Number 2, construction shall meet all federal, provincial, and municipal regulations, bylaws, codes, and statutes that apply. And number 3, the structure is to be removed at the end of the 2020 season.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Buckingham. Thank you. Any further discussion or comments before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, Natasha.
Thank you.
Moving on to 6.5.2, City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 6.5.2, transfer of 2018 and 2019 outstanding stormwater utility charges to taxes. I'll ask Karen De La Rosa to present.
Good afternoon, Karen.
Your Worship, I know I got a message from Karen earlier that there was a little bit of a lag, so if we get into technical difficulties, I will present for her as well.
Okay, I think she just, Karen, are you there?
Yes, sorry, Your Worship.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Issues. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. Before you is the request for a decision regarding the transfer of 2018 outstanding stormwater utility charges to taxes, with a recommendation that Council approve the outstanding stormwater utility account amounts listed in Table 1, 2018 outstanding stormwater utility charges be transferred to the 2020 tax roll of the property owner. So as advised during the April 14th council meeting or GPC meeting, there are a total of 25 properties from 24 stormwater utility customer accounts that have outstanding amounts totaling $20,561.31 and have been in arrears since March of 2019. Administration recommends that these amounts be transferred to the 2020 tax roll of the property owner to recover the amounts in arrears. Notification letters were mailed to the property owners in October of last year to inform property owners that administration has begun the process of transferring the amounts to the 2020 tax roll. The options available to council are that council approve the transfer or the outstanding stormwater utility account amounts listed in a Table 1, 2018 outstanding stormwater utility charges be transferred to the 2020 tax roll of the property owner, or that council not approve the transfer, or that council direct administration to bring forward more information. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Karen. Questions, Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Without getting into too much detail, Karen, because I know that this is somewhat confidential information as to who belongs to all these accounts, can you tell me why 2 of these accounts add up to half of the total owing? How do those get that large that 2 of these would make up half of our total transfer here?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Councillor Buckingham. So the stormwater utility charges are based on property size. So these properties would likely be a larger property. That's why the outstanding amount is larger compared to others.
So it's not the fact that there's multiple years arrears here or anything.
No, this is all for the 2018 stormwater utility charges, and these charges have been in arrears since March of 2019.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Your Worship. There was, I believe, one account, the land had been sold. And I just wondered, when these things become in arrears, this is 2 years old. And I understand that part of it. Is there some other way that, or an additional way that we can put something on the title when this doesn't happen? What I mean is, doesn't happen, doesn't get paid after year one, and the land's sold. Now we're out hiring collection agencies. So is there any other way to go about this?
We will be looking into that issue, Councillor Baker, but as of right now, our only mechanism to recover those amounts in arrears is through sending them through collections. But that is a very good point, and that's something that we will be looking into as we further improve this process.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad to hear that, because, you know, it's unfortunate for the next homeowner or landowner that's sitting there against the property he owns. He's not going to be liable, but at the same time, sometimes when you transfer titles, if there's nothing on the title, it's going to get by on you. So, but thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Baker. I want to just chase that rabbit a little bit more further down the hole, I guess you could say. So Karen, when you say you're looking at it, is that something that would come in the form of a bylaw or a change to the legislation around the utilities? Is that what you're looking at?
So thank you, Your Worship. So as of right now, we are looking into how we're implementing the stormwater utility charges, specifically these annual accounts that we bill on an annual basis. So we would be putting forward some recommendations or some action items to improve the implementation of the bylaw.
I appreciate that. I think that as Councillor Fragment alluded to, the red tape reduction, if we can streamline the process as we move forward here, I think this is something new. We've all experienced the stormwater utility charges that came in by this council, but to make your jobs and administration's work easier rather than bringing this back on an annual basis would be maybe something to look at as well. So any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. I will ask for direction on 6.5.2 from Council. Transfer of 2018 and 2019 outstanding stormwater utility charges. Councillor Fagnan.
That Council approve the outstanding stormwater utility account amounts listed in Table 1, 2018. Outstanding stormwater utility charges be transferred to the 2020 tax roll on the property owner of the
property owner. Thank you. And a seconder for that motion? Councillor Diachuk, thank you very much. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. I will call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, Council.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Karen. Moving on to item number 7, bylaws. I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For bylaw 7.1, bylaw number 12-2020, land use bylaw 5, 2016 text amendment, medium industrial I2 district. First reading. I'm going to pass it back to Natasha. Just for council's knowledge, Natasha is going to present without her camera on it. Hopefully it'll assist with the data feed. So,
all right. Good afternoon again, Natasha.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship. Hopefully this works better this time. To bylaw number 12, 2020, being a bylaw to amend the text of land use bylaw 5, 2016 within the medium industrial I2 district, and that council establish a public hearing to be held at City Hall at a future council meeting. City Council, medium industrial district within the land use bylaw. The proposed amendment is a result of an application submitted which seeks to include aesthetic shops and health services as a discretionary uses within the district. The current property owner has struggled to occupy a portion of their building and has recently been approached by a potential tenant that has
I'm sorry if I could interrupt, Natasha. I don't think we're all getting that executive manager saying.
Is that the first part of that? Thanks, Natasha. Executive Manager staying.
Coming. Just give it a sec there to catch up.
All right.
There we go. Sorry.
If you'd like, Executive Manager, I can read the RFD. I've got it.
No, I was just, I thought I had it, but it was the wrong one. I apologize. I think Natasha was at a point where she was talking about the proposed I-2 district. Is that where she was, Your Worship?
Yeah, so
My apologies.
I think she was it was the issue she was just getting into why this is being brought forward.
Okay, an application was received to amend land use bylaw number 5-2016 by adding aesthetic shops and health services as discretionary use within the medium industrial or I-2 district. The applicant owns a building located in the district with a vacancy they are looking to fill. A potential tenant has expressed interest in utilizing the space to offer a variety of services falling under the definition of aesthetic shops and health services within the land use bylaw. However, these uses are not permitted or discretionary uses within an I-2 district. The medium I-2 district is currently comprised of a wide range of industrial uses, including but not limited to fleet services, equipment repair shops, and industrial storage, but does not include commercial use such as offices and amusement establishments. This amendment is not site-specific in nature, and should it be approved, will affect all properties within I-2 districts across the city. The purpose of the I-2 district is to provide for industrial uses that carry out a portion of their operations outdoors or require outdoor storage areas. Any nuisance associated with these uses should not extend beyond the boundaries of the site. This proposed amendment conflicts with policy 10.1.7 of the Municipal Development Plan, or MDP, which states that the city should restrict non-industrial uses, example, commercial uses, in these areas designated for industrial development. This practice aims to protect industrial districts from becoming diluted with incompatible commercial uses, which may pose opposition or additional industrial uses intended for these districts in the future. We'll refer to Appendix A for additional information on that. We can get to that after I get through the admin report. So granting for first reading to bylaw 12-2020 will provide an opportunities for those affected by the requested application to address City Council during a public hearing to be held at a future regular council meeting. Public hearings are required by Municipal Government Act as part of the adoption or amendment process for statutory plans and the land use bylaw. Administration issued internal and external referrals and advertised a public referral in the April 2nd, 9th, and 16, 2020 issues of the Meridian Source to solicit comment. The referral period ends on April 23rd, 2020. At the time of the writing, no objections have been received to the application. The item was brought forward to Council for discussion during the Governance Priority Committee meeting on April 14, 2020. Lead Service has reviewed the bylaw number 12-2020 in governance implications in order to allow aesthetics shops and health services as discretionary use within the medium industrial or I-2 district. An amendment to the land use bylaw is required. And again, I want to reiterate, if the text amendment is approved by Council, it would be applicable across the city of Lloydminster and not specific to this one application. There's also a map attached. I just want to go through Appendix A. So administration has reviewed the application, and to provide additional information has provided the plan standards and legislation review on this text amendment. I'm gonna go through it because I think it's important to share this information both with Council and the public. The city is currently in the process of considering a text amendment to the medium industrial I-2 district within the land use bylaw 5-2016. The proposed amendment is a result of an application submitted which seeks to include aesthetic shops and health services as a discretionary use within the district. They have struggled to occupy a portion of their building and have recently been approached by a potential tenant that has expressed interest in utilizing their space to offer services as defined by the two following uses: aesthetic shop and health services. An information report, or IR, was presented to the Governance Priority Committee on April 14, 2020, outlining the application. It was noticed that the amendment is not site specific, and the approved would apply to all parties within the I2 district. Most of the city's industrial lands fall within I2 district, and the purpose of the I2 district is outlined in the Land Use Bylaw 5-2016 to provide for industrial uses to carry out a portion of their operations outdoor or require outdoor storage areas, and any nuisance associated with these uses should not extend beyond the boundaries of the site. The district should be located in the interior of industrial areas surrounded by light industrial district or separated from any residential district by arterial roads or higher quality industrial or commercial district. Generally speaking, lands that are districted as I2 are surrounded by either light industrial, I1, or heavy industrial, I3 district. Service commercial or C5 district act as a transition buffer between commercial developments within the city and the industrial developments. This is the district in which we begin to see reduction in commercial uses as uses which are deemed to not be compatible against industrial lands are removed. As suggested in the IR presented to GPC, inclusion of the above use as a discretionary use within I2 district conflicts with policy 10.1.7 of the Municipal Development Plan. The plan states the city should restrict non-industrial use, i.e. commercial use, in those areas designated for industrial development. The purpose of the practice is to protect industrial districts from becoming diluted with incompatible commercial uses which may pose opposition to the additional industrial uses intended for the areas in the future. Additionally, inclusion of the two commercial uses, being aesthetic shop and health services, may encourage others to make similar applications to allow commercial uses within industrial districts. This would further lead to reducing opportunities for heavy industrial uses in the industrial districts. Additionally, other commercial districts may miss out on development opportunities, which may increase their vibrancy. Planning administration researched several bylaws, and it is not common practice to include such amendments within the industrial districts. Within 8 land use bylaws reviewed in the province of Alberta, no municipalities included such uses as either permitted or discretionary uses within the industrial district. Should this amendment be approved, the City of Lloydminster will begin to set precedents on how to interpret the previously identified policy within the NDP that the city's industrial lands are not truly for the excessive development of industrial uses. Lastly, amendments to the land use bylaw should not be made in response to events or economic times. The intent of the municipal development plan and land use bylaw is to set long-term vision for the city and provide a framework for development which aligns with the city's vision. Amendments that are responsive in nature will tend to have long-term effects on the community as well as the growth and development. Once uses are approved within a district, it is extremely difficult to remove them as the uses will continue to exist and be classified as legal non-conforming until they choose to leave. I'll pass it back to your worship if there's any questions or concerns. And I hope Natasha's still on the line because if there are questions, she may have to assist with the response.
All right. Just I'll check. Natasha, are you still with us by telephone?
I am here.
Okay, you're a little broken, but hopefully we can get through that if there's any questions. So I'll look to Council. Councillor Torsen, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I apologize if I'm interpreting this wrong, but to me it sounds like we're going through a lot of administration rather is going through a lot of effort to say this is not a great idea, but the recommendation is that we give first reading of the bylaw something, and that, like, I'm just a little confused on that. And maybe that's just the way it has to be, is that the recommendation is that you give it first reading. You're not telling us how to feel about it, but, you know, with the description of everything that's going on, I think I have a pretty good idea of where administration's coming from on this. So, you know, when I look at these things, I don't fully understand, you know, how we got here. So to me, changing an entire district's use of everything for a single development doesn't make sense. Had you said, hey, I would like to amend this particular property from medium industrial to light industrial or commercial or something like that, or to get some kind of permitted use working for that particular building, that'd be a different scenario, because you run into that when someone is, you know, kind of adding commercial use to a residential property or something along those lines. So I just don't understand why we would kind of throw a blanket over the entire medium industrial kind of use for one particular development. So my question is, was this the advice that the people received from our planning staff, was to make this type of request on behalf of council rather than a request to just change the use of one particular property?
I saw the city clerk had his hand up, then I saw executive manager Stang. So, and Councilor Baker, I did acknowledge, I see you were, but I'd like to get to administration first to hear city clerk, if you want to answer that first.
Well, the first portion of that is, Councillor, you asked why we would allow this when it appears that administration is advising against it. They did pay for a application pursuant to the land use to amend the land use bylaw. So it was felt if the first reading is given, then we can hold a public hearing. They have an opportunity to address council, give their feelings, let council know why they'd like to have this amendment passed, and then council can vote on the second and third readings at that time.
Executive manager Stang.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. So the applicant came to us and asked for a text amendment. Although our administration feels that it may not be appropriate, we do owe it to the applicant to go through the process, bring it to first reading, have a public hearing, and then make a decision based on second and third reading. With regards to the change of zoning, I may need to get Natasha to speak to that. Sorry, she's just texting me. Sorry, give me 2 seconds here to read what she said.
No problem. I've got you, Councilor Baker and Councilor Torsen, if you'd be so willing to entertain a question from Councilor Baker first, and I'll come back to.
I just had a response real quick to that statement. It won't change anything really. It's just that, yeah, I understand it was just the way recommendation reads. And I guess, you know, it's maybe been a while since I've looked at it this way. I totally agree that, you know, every applicant should get their opportunity to present in front of council and make an argument one way or another. So, you know, I'm in favor of the process. It's just, how did we get here? I'm interested in hearing from Natasha as well. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Your Worship, just to answer that. So that would be spot zoning, which is why they need the amendment to the text. They would need to go to a commercial district, which would be deemed as incompatible with the adjacent industrial land. So the only way to be compatible is to do the text amendment, which they've requested and we brought forward. Again, administration is cautioning council to consider the long-term effects of that type of a decision.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stang. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I fully understand that the people that made this application would like to make use of this building, and we would like them to have the use of the building. However, we have zoning bylaws to protect people against conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that I've seen conflict in this city. For example, whether you're in heavy industrial, medium or light industrial, you're dealing with rules that apply to the given zone. So when you zone commercial, for example, or residential, and you've heard me say it, putting a sixplex in an R1 zone isn't something that everybody likes to see. You have to be in a zone that allows for R4 construction. And the idea is that if you put a commercial business up next door to some kind of operation of medium or heavy industrial, you're dealing with noise, odor, aesthetics of the site storage, dust, trucking, and all these other things. And the next thing you have is the person in the commercial complaining about the guy next door when he's in a perfectly legal zoning district. So if you're going to start mixing and matching, you might as well just throw it open because you've got a war on your hands. And we have all kinds of examples of that in this town, and I won't talk about them today. But we're really asking for trouble. You can have a ready mix plant and somebody's got a ice cream shop next door. I'm not sure about that, or any kind of combination. And I think that over the last 10, 15 years, city administration's done a good job of trying to zone property for the usage required within our city. And it's not that we don't have any commercial space available in the city. It's not like there's nowhere to go. I'm sure there's lots of empty spaces. But I think that we're just opening up Pandora's box if we get into this spot, as Don said, spot zoning. Where do you go tomorrow and the next day and the next day? So I could take you on a drive around the city and show you some of these spots, but I don't really think you want to waste your time. So I really feel that this is really not the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Baker. Yeah, I had already started to draw a few X's on my map that's up on the screen right now on my hard copy because where the transition, I was going, okay, there is a transition, especially in the north end into the industrial park that exists in the north end of our city and to the west side. And I think it's important, I have to agree with you that we need to have an established area, because what would happen is then a future council will have to deal with other issues potentially in the near future. And it's just gonna, where does it stop? And it is, you will take down the fence and the yard just opens right up. And I'm afraid that's exactly as you alluded to. Councillor Torsen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I just, I agree with everything that's been said. Don't get me wrong, but I hope it's not a waste of time and money, but I'm interested in hearing what the development is. Because if you hear that, maybe we don't have a full picture, because I don't really know what the development is other than aesthetic shop and health services. Maybe they're manufacturing wigs. You know what I mean? Maybe this is a manufacturing type of facility, and we don't have any of those kind of details, I guess. Like, I'm interested in hearing what the applicant has to say in terms of the rationale, and then council can take all the information in, process it, and make a decision that fits with our land use bylaw and what we're trying to do here.
My understanding is they have a vacancy and would like to bring in an aesthetic shop. Natasha, I don't know if you have more information on the actual applicant and what they're wanting to open up in this industrial space.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so yes, my understanding from the pre-application meetings I had with the applicant is this will run as an appointment-based service spa, offering things from hair, nails, eyebrow services, and then you lost me.
Yeah, we're losing you. So if I can reiterate what I heard is Natasha is trying to say the applicant is opening a appointment service for spa-like services, hair, nails, and those types of things that you would more than which are more evident in our commercial areas, not necessarily in our industrial area. So no, it's not a wig manufacturer.
Okay. Councillor Baker, you've got the floor.
Oh, Your Worship, it says right in the report, aesthetic shop and health services.
And,
So,
and
that just doesn't.
I appreciate that. I think that I hear what Councillor Torsen said from that perspective, and I'm torn because from this perspective, because the first reading allows the public hearing to go forward, have the make the presentation, and that's what administration has asked for. They've also given us option number 2, that there would not be that it would not carry forward, and that would end the discussion completely. So I think that's some things to wait. Councillor Fragment, I see you'd like to speak. You have the floor as soon as you're on.
Yeah, just to throw a little bit of a curve there. I understand what everybody's saying, but I ran across a product called infrastructure intensive industrial land use. And what that is getting at is, there's many cities in North America and in Europe that are relaxing their zoning restrictions, especially in industrial land classes. And that's all to do with the with infrastructure. Instead of sprawling it all out and utilizing, some of these cities are utilizing. A lot of them have been around for a longer period of time, of course, and they have many old buildings and things like that are being repurposed. But yeah, as you look down the road, it's kind of interesting that's what they're doing. Those industrial zones are already there. The industry is in there, and then there's just smaller businesses that are going in and complementing it. Whether it's being, some have been actually residential up top, and then of course with all kinds of shops and things like that in it. So just to throw a little bit of a curve in there. I certainly agree with what's being said, but there's a little bit of a different twist on it.
Thank you, Councillor. Executive Manager Stang, I believe you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point that if Council is going to consider the text amendment, we would be actually seeking amendments to more zoning than just the I-1. It would also include C5 zoning as well.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Baker.
I guess Europe, what they do in Europe, they do in Europe. We have our Canadian rules and we have our zoning bylaws, and what somebody does in Europe, I understand, but mix and match, it's just, we're not to that stage in life yet. We're only 100 years old. So I'm really concerned about where we're going if we're going to start jumping around and putting any kind of business just about anywhere where they want to be. Then we might as well throw our planning and zoning bylaws out and make it all discretionary. But I really just have a struggle with the case, and especially aesthetics and healthcare shop next to somebody with a trucking business. Just doesn't add up.
It would be an interesting endeavor, Councillor. You're right. Exactly. Councillor Monroe, I'll let you, you're first, and then Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of twofold on this one. I understand, we have our zoning bylaws for a reason, but right now we're going through the most unprecedented time that the world has ever experienced. Right now, oil is trading at below zero, right? There's unprecedented things that are happening in our community. And, maybe we need to be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more optimistic into what goes with what. We should be promoting any business really that is going to provide jobs, whether or not that's in the correct zone or not, I don't know. But what I am open to is I'm open to having the discussion. I'm open to having the applicant come and speak to us if that's what the next step is, to at least hear what they have to say. Because I think we do, maybe this is the way it's always been in the past, Ken, and I respect that and I appreciate that. But what we need to also acknowledge is that things moving forward look a lot different than they ever have in the past. So I don't think that it's the worst idea to have this applicant come and speak to us and at least have the opportunity to maybe voice on what innovation and that they want to bring to the table. Just my opinion.
Councillor, Executive Manager Stang, and then on to Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, Your Worship, administration's not saying we don't want the business to go forward in our community or a new business to open up. we want council to consider. There's plenty of opportunities in spaces, vacancies in the commercial areas already. I think that was already noted by your worship. There is vacancies where this type of business could fit in. Even home businesses, these are some things that could be considered from a home business perspective as well. Putting this type of business into the industrial area does pose some future implications, and we just want to make sure that council's fully aware that if you are making a decision, you're making it for the long term and not just based on what our current economic and COVID-19 situations are. So I just want to reiterate that.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stank. Councillor Diachuk, I believe you would.
Yeah, thanks, Worship. I agree. You know, even though we are in a particular context now with our economy, I mean, I was just going to say what Executive Manager Stank said. There's space throughout our community, and you just have to drive around and look and see that there are a lot of wonderful locations where this type of business is, and so there obviously some relationship between the two parties that are involved here, one being the owner and the other person wanting to set up the business. I just think that it's I feel like somehow are compelled to hear the story, but I think by hearing the pitch, it's important by the same token that the very pieces that we're talking about here, the person who's applying gets to hear the arguments as well. I think they have the right to have access to City Council, so I would support making that first motion, but certainly beyond that, I can't see how we make this level of change to the city and how we zone it to accommodate one business. So one business has come forward, not 10, not 20, one business, and we zone for hundreds of businesses in our community. So I think we need to keep that perspective as we go forward here. But I think they paid their money for the permit to ask the request. They want to talk to council. They have the right to do that. We'll listen.
And I think that's what I'm open to as well, is that I just want to hear what they have to say. There's always another perspective for something. So, and at least they deserve to be able to ask us. We can ask them what questions, and they've done the process and their due diligence on what they need to do. So we need to do ours as well.
Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. I will look to council for direction on 7.1, bylaw number 12-2020, LUB 5/2016 text amendment. Councillor Diachuk.
All right, to make the motion that council grant first reading to bylaw number 12-2020, being a bylaw to amend the text of land use bylaw number 5/2016 within the medium industrial I2 district, and that council establish a public hearing to be held at City Hall council chambers during the future regular council meeting.
I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Monroe. Any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, council. Good discussion. And I think this is a very interesting subject that we'll look forward to having more discussion about. Moving on to 7.2, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Worship. For 7.2, bylaw number 13-2020, Community Services Advisory Committee bylaw, I'll ask Patrick Lancaster. I don't see Patrick on here yet.
There he is, I believe.
There he is. Hi, Patrick. And go ahead, Patrick.
Good afternoon, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Council.
Good afternoon, Patrick.
Administration has drafted a bylaw for the establishment of the Community Services Advisory Committee. This committee would serve as a replacement for the existing Family and Community Support Services Advisory Committee, which is a group of community volunteers appointed by Council to provide recommendations to Council on different grants that are administered through the municipality. These grants total about $500,000 in community investment, resulting in numerous jobs in our nonprofit sector and supports for our residents. At present, the committee oversees the Family and Community Support Services Grant, which receives funding through the Province of Alberta FCSS program, and the Saskatchewan Lotteries Community Grant Program, which receives its funding through Saskatchewan Lotteries. The bylaw that we've drafted to replace the FCSS Advisory Committee has a few changes and a few updates that will allow for more flexibility in how the city manages some of the grants, and we'll update some of the existing terms. So some of the key points where this bylaw, this new committee, will differ from the old one is there is the formalization of a youth appointee. There is a change of the chairperson position to a committee member rather than a representative from administration. There are new clauses in this bylaw addressing code of conduct and conflict of interest. There are changes to how staff positions are referenced in the document to avoid inconsistencies with future organizational chart changes. And there is removal of content specific to the Family and Community Support Services program, which will be captured in a separate policy that will be introduced should this bylaw reach second and third reading. The intent would be to have separate policies from the bylaw that speak to whichever grants council would like this committee to provide recommendations on. So in the future, potentially, this committee could really do any grant that the council or the city would like recommendations from the community over. Tentatively planned would be FCSS, Saskatchewan Lotteries, and then there's been some discussion about the addition of the Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant. The recommendation from administration is a council grant first reading to bylaw number 13-2020, being a bylaw for the establishment of the Community Services Advisory Committee. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Patrick. I'll look to Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I think I may have asked it before, but has there been any discussion or feedback or concerns from the existing committee?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Buckingham. We went before bringing forward the before actually drafting the bylaw, we approached the committee and sought some consultation from them about potential changes and updates and items that would be included in the bylaw. So some of the existing content is actually from the committee itself. I believe a question that was asked in the past is about the addition of an additional grant, the discussion around adding the Lloydminster Tobacco Reduction Grant. And the committee members seem to be on board with the addition. What we would be talking about is potentially just one more meeting per year. And when we introduce new committee members, we usually tell them 3 to 4 meetings in a year total. Typically, up until this point, we've only had to call 2 or 3 meetings. So we wouldn't be looking at a significant increase in workload unless in the future more grants were to be added on top of the existing.
Good, thank you. And I just one more question. I may have missed it in rereading the bylaw, but existing appointments get reset with a new bylaw on this, kind of similar to Councillor Monroe's question on the library, actually.
Actually, I'll have to defer this one to the city clerk, but I believe we would need to reappoint the existing members to the committee.
I believe that we'd have to look at that. I haven't had a chance to review that, but if that's what Patrick's saying, we would follow the same as we would do for the library board bylaw.
Yeah, I just didn't see it in the draft, so I just thought I should bring it up now.
Thank you.
That's a good point, Councillor, and the terminology of the length of terms. I think it is mentioned in the length of terms. I thought I read, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
In 6.3. So it's just a question of whether someone, they would have to be, could have served for some time. This comes in 6.3.1.3.2 and so 6.4 speaks to that. So I think it would be up to the individuals that let their names stand and were asked to be appointed to that committee would determine how long they would sit. From that perspective, if that's what you're thinking, rather than adding 10-year terms, up to 10 years more for some if they felt they had already served already.
Well, I just wanted to, I think the comment was made around the library board as well that the city clerk had made. There's some good folks that are doing good work on this committee, and you know, having those staggered appointments if somebody's in the middle of something there, as opposed to having to reset everybody at the same time. So it's continually switching, I think would be very key.
I think I agree with you 100%, Councillor, having sat in that committee once for the perspective of as a council representative. There's no question there's a very committed committee, but you're right, you wouldn't want to lose all the experience at one time. Patrick, I think you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've had some discussion about staggering as well with our committee, and we do have a couple of members that are prepared to stagger their terms or step down in advance to make way for others, so to ensure that we would not have a sudden exodus of all members at the same time as well.
Excellent. Councillor Diachuk.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just the resignations and dismissals. We deal pretty much with dismissals, but nothing around resignations. So I'm just wondering whether it's worth putting a 9.2 member may resign from the advisory committee at any point in time by notification of email or written notice, whatever it is. I mean, people are moving and doing things, and so because we talk about resignations and dismissals, but then we're removing them by, I guess that it says written. Oh, it says that. So resignation. Sorry.
No problem. I was just reading that.
Yeah, it has the flavor of dismissal more than anything, right? But so it's in 9.1.1.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Baker.
Just a quick question. Okay. Council's always appointed the members to the advisory board, right?
I believe so.
And what are you going to do now? Like, there's questions from Councillor Buckingham that got my head going here a bit. So what's different? What are you suggesting, Councillor Aaron? Like, I must have missed something.
Sorry, not for any changes to how it's appointed. It's the when. So there'd be a staggering, so that not
when?
everybody turned over at the same time.
Excuse me,
Yep.
I missed that.
No
Thank you
problem,
very
Councillor.
much.
No.
So nothing changes really.
Nothing really changes from that perspective. Councillor Fagnan, I see your hand up. Oh, just hang on, Councillor Fagnan. We'll get you the mic in just a second. And there we are. I believe there you are, Councillor Fagnan.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment on the committee itself. I've had the pleasure of sitting on that for a number of years, and I know how diligent these committee members work. They take it very serious, and I think this is great to have on the tobacco grant side of things, because this is, again, it'll be community driven, and I think that's very important, on this subject. So yeah, glad to see that they should have that ability, and I know that they will do a great job if they have the opportunity.
Thank you. Any other comments? Did I miss any other comments from council? Questions? Patrick, please go ahead.
Well, if I may, Your Worship, I do want to say that we are deeply appreciative of all the work that the volunteers on our committee do. With this being National Volunteer Week, we especially want to thank all those members on the committee who've been working very hard with sort of ongoing consultations we've been doing with them, but especially with the grant work they've done up to this point.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I think in light of all the current situations, we're missing a lot of the different things that we usually do annually, week to week. So being National Volunteer Week, I just made note of that. Thank you. And we'll mention that a little later on. But indeed, it's a group of volunteers. Patrick and his team lead the efforts. And currently, Councillor Buckingham sits on that committee as council's representative. And I've had the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to attend a meeting and be part of it. And it's a very interesting process. And Councillor Fagnan's alluded to his past. It's a great community effort, and it's a broad spectrum of the community, and it's a great discussion. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I call it negotiations of the committee to try and arrive at where the money gets allocated in the city. And I think that was that spoke very highly of that committee. I was very impressed. So thank you to the volunteers there as well. Anyone else have any other comments? Councillor Buckingham.
I'm ready to make the motion if you're willing, Your Worship.
I am open and to be entertained with that motion, please.
I move the council grant first reading of bylaw 13-2020 being a bylaw for the establishment of the Community Services Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Fagnan. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on that item before I call for the question? Not seeing any. All in favor?
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Opposed? Carried. Moving on to, thank you very much, Patrick. Moving on to 7.3, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 7.3, bylaw number 14-2020, operating line of credit bylaw, I'll ask our CFO, Denise McDonald, to present.
Good afternoon, Council.
Good afternoon, Denise.
Thank you for this opportunity to present to you the operating line of credit. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the city may be faced with less revenue received into the general bank account than usual. We have social distancing measures that have resulted in facility closures, and to help alleviate financial pressures during the pandemic, utility and property tax deferral options have been offered to taxpayers and ratepayers for the city of Lloydminster. Cash and investment balances are being monitored regularly and carefully, and the city is working to maximize interest revenue in investment decisions. Currently, the city has short-term investments of approximately 44.5 million and long-term investments of a little over 12 million. In addition, the city has an operating line of credit as exists right now at 12.5. This line of credit was, I'm not sure when it originally started, but I know it has existed since 2016, and we have never accessed it. Due to the pandemic and difficulties to forecast taxpayers and ratepayers' ability to pay, we felt it was prudent to increase the operating line of credit to support the continued service requirements of the city. Those residents and businesses that are in a position to continue to pay, we encourage them to pay their property taxes and utilities, and that would allow us to not have to access this line of credit. However, it is probably important that we have it available to us. Administration anticipates increasing the maximum operating line of credit to the amount of 25 million. And this will ensure the city has sufficient cash flow to meet service delivery requirements throughout the coming months as a result of COVID-19. The Lloydminster Charter states that this section 119 applies to the borrowing made for the purpose of financing operating expenditures, and that the amount to be borrowed together with unpaid balances of other borrowings made for the purpose of operating expenditures cannot exceed the raised taxes in the current year. The approved line of credit operating bylaw will ensure the requirements set out in the Lloydminster Charter and authorized financial institutions are met. So at this point, we're looking at first reading to bylaw 14-2020 operating line of credit, or a council can ask us to reduce the line of credit to less than 25 million if you choose. I wanted to make note that the maximum allowed is 36 million approximately as per legislation. So we are not taking the maximum. We're not proposing to take the maximum. We're proposing a little bit less, 25 million. Or our third option would be for council to request further information and that the bylaw be brought forward to a future council meeting date. So in alignment with strategic plan, this item is in alignment for sustainable future fiscal strategy. Administration anticipates that an operating line of credit in the amount of 25 million will provide security to ensure the city has sufficient cash flow to meet service delivery requirements throughout the coming months. With that, I'll turn it back to the mayor for further discussion.
Thank you, CFO, for that presentation. Councillor Torsen.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I guess I'd just like to say that I do agree with the CFO in that this is a very prudent step as we are going to allow, or we're going to consider allowing, and we did through a resolution already, but there's some follow-up bylaws to to follow up on some of the deferrals that we've discussed allowing and passed resolutions on. That this step will be really important in ensuring that we can manage our cash flow through the year, as you know, the timing of when things normally would be coming to us is now going to be at a different date. So I think it's really important that we start moving the ball on this one and getting through the process, because as I understand it, bylaws relating to loans take a little bit more time than normal ones. So I think it's a very prudent move, and doing this will give us the leverage to be able to manage our system while we are potentially going to be granting, you know, additional credit across the city to all of our taxpayers and residents and everyone who uses utility fees. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer type of thing to do. The right amount, whether it's lower or not, I don't know. We've never had to dip into it before, but I imagine with the moving target of cash flow, with property taxes coming in at a later date and utilities coming in at a later date, as well as the construction season being upon us, and that's generally when we spend a large portion of our funds, we could end up actually dipping into this time, and it's likely that we will. So I think it's good to give ourselves as much wiggle room as we can, and I don't see the need to go up to the 36 million in my opinion, but you know, 25,000 or 25 million is probably a safe bet, and I think that it's something that I definitely support doing.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions and comments? I guess I would like to chime in if I may. CFO, you talked about our investment short term, and I had written here, I call those savings. In essence, I believe they're restricted and unrestricted savings or accumulations that the city has made over a number of years. And as I mentioned, some of those are restricted. We couldn't even dibble into that money if people thought it was the rainy day fund, as it's sometimes referred to.
Yes, our audited financial statements are not yet completed or submitted to council yet, but I can tell you that our reserve balances at December 31st are in the neighborhood of 50 million. So when you look at our investments, you can see that that covers our reserves.
Right. And those have been built up over a long time, and in some cases are earmarked for many different future projects or sustainability of our infrastructure as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I'd like to explain further the reason why we are looking at 25 and not the full amount. When I went to the financial institutions, they told me that when they approve a line of credit for us, they have to back that line of credit. So if we have no intention of drawing that money, they still have to back it in their own financial institution. So by trying to use the tool to the maximum for us, we may be disadvantaging our financial institution because they can't use that money for other investments. So we decided to reduce it to 25. And we also wrote in the bylaw to use, to keep it generic to financial institutions in case we needed to approach two different financial institutions. That will give us that option.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. The other question I had is what's being proposed as I read this is to replace the existing bylaw that this council, I know we voted on it, of 12.5 million. It will then be replaced with 25 million. And once things return to a newer normal or a state of normal, as I'd like to hopefully refer to it as, we could potentially be asked to bring back a bylaw, or you'll bring back a bylaw that could reduce this to a more amiable amount, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
That would be the intent.
That sounds great, because that I hate borrowing if we don't have to, if we can work within the means. And again, you mentioned it, and I'll reinforce it again, that I want to make sure that if people are watching or seeing this online, that if you can pay your utility bills, you will help the city overall, which is a direct benefit to not needing to access the line of credit, which will have to be paid back by you, the taxpayer, in a form of interest somewhere in the city budget. So there's not I just encourage people, if you can continue to support your bills as best as you can, and by all means, we'll be talking about this a little bit later on. We've structured it from that perspective, and we do need support to keep the city afloat from a financial perspective. So if you can help, we do encourage taxpayers to pay what they can. And we have extended those deadlines. It's been outlined in previous council meetings, but this is an important part because at the end of the day, the city has to remain fiscally responsible as well, and appreciate that. Any other comments? Not seeing any. I would look for direction from council on 7.3, the bylaw 14-2020 operating line of credit bylaw. Councillor Torsen.
I move that council grant first reading to bylaw 14-2020 operating line of credit bylaw.
Thank you. Seconder. Got Councillor Baker. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on that item? Not seeing any. I will call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item 7.4, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. To present 7.4, bylaw number 15-2020, emergency management bylaw amendment, I'll ask Glenn Nolford to present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity to present bylaw 15-2020, the emergency management bylaw amendment. Recommendation before you is that council grant 3 readings to bylaw 15-2020, the emergency management bylaw amendment, and pass this bylaw at today's council meeting. The issue that we're faced with is the charter specifies that the Saskatchewan Public Health Act 1994 applies throughout the city of Lloydminster. It also provides in the same section that the Alberta Emergency Management Act applies throughout the city as well. The background on this is, of course, as you're aware, the incident management team was activated on March 11th, began working through the involving pandemic emergency. The province of Alberta declared a public health emergency under the Alberta Public Health Act. And at the next day, Saskatchewan declared a provincial state of emergency under the Emergency Planning Act. Neither piece of legislation applies to the city of Lloydminster. So on the 19th, the city of Lloydminster declared a state of local emergency to permit implementation of conditions that were in agreement with what had been brought forward by each of the provinces. The subsequent public health order was initiated by the Chief Medical Officer of Saskatchewan with escalating restrictions as the situation progressed through March and into April. Both Alberta and Saskatchewan have provided for penalties and fines for violations of their respective orders. Jurisdictional issues arose when we were looking at this in the incident management team, and when discussing enforcement options, should persons or businesses choose to willfully ignore the conditions of either the Saskatchewan Public Health Order or the state of local emergency. So consultation was done with our Legislative Services Department, the city's Emergency Management Organization Manager, the Lloydminster RCMP Detachment Commander, Saskatchewan and Alberta Crown Prosecution Services, as well as Saskatchewan Public Health. The current emergency management bylaw 08-2018 does not have a penalty clause in it. Ongoing communication through a variety of methods, as well as education and requests for voluntary adherence to the conditions, would be the primary means of gaining compliance. However, should these be unsuccessful, it's proposed that a penalty clause within the emergency management bylaw would permit consistent and fair application of the state of local emergency conditions should enforcement be needed as a last resort. As this is a bylaw, it would be similar to all the other bylaws that we have, where an offense in the city would go to the respective competent court of jurisdiction, either an offense in Alberta going to the Alberta courts or an offense in Saskatchewan going to the Saskatchewan courts. And a full review of the bylaws being conducted has been ongoing prior to the pandemic occurring, and it's anticipated that this would be consolidated and brought back to council within the next 12 months. So the different options that are available or that are being presented to council is that council grant all 4 motions indicated in the recommendations, or that the council not approve the third reading, or that further information be requested and brought back to council at a future meeting.
Thank you, Executive Manager. I will look to council for questions or comments. Councillor Torsen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
We've got you.
Yeah, just as far as, this seems like a bit of a housekeeping issue in that as we move along, there's always more and more kind of items that pop up in this, scenario where the law of the land doesn't necessarily apply the way we thought it did, or just things that happen over the course of time where, we need to be able to have the tools to enforce different things. And luckily the charter gives us the ability to do that. And I just see that as, a way to get in line with what every other kind of jurisdiction is doing and giving us the ability to do that. So that's the way I see this. And, definitely am in favor of taking the next step so that we can provide the proper enforcement to ensure that, people are doing the right things in these scenarios so we can get over this COVID period quickly and we can get on with, the rest of our lives. So, and to protect as many people as possible. The only thing that I'd otherwise provide comment on, because this is something I've been very public about in the past, is 3 readings in 1 meeting. That's not something that I do. Well, that's a principle that I generally follow. Because I don't like the idea of just ramming things through and not giving the public opportunity to know and understand what's going on before things happen, and giving the opportunity for feedback prior to actually going through with certain things, and really allowing the process to do what it's supposed to do with multiple readings. But that is a principle that I at least know at this point in my political career that is not always practical, and that at times you need to abandon the principle in light of something that's more practical. And for this purpose, I think that it's important that if everyone is in support of this and the way it reads, that we do all 3 readings in 1 sitting, because it's important that we have the tools in place to be able to do the proper enforcement so that we can get through this and get through the kind of the COVID period more quickly, and give our bylaw officers the tools that they need to ensure that the state of local emergency is followed properly.
Thank you, Councillor. Other comments? I guess I would like to reinstate what Manager Glenn brought forward. Was this is a last resort. Our bylaw and police officers, I believe, have tried to work cooperatively with people, helping make sure they understand the law, as they do every day in many cases. And this is that last resort for those that choose to go against the law, which is as we see it in the country today and around the world. So I think that when the last time that the emergency management bylaw was updated, we never had this issue, and we never had this issue prior to that. So this is one of those things that sometimes requires an amendment that I would as well support, because I think we're just trying to deal with the circumstances at hand and go from there, and hope that it does not have to be used, but is a tool in the toolbox. Councillor Baker? There you are.
Before you call for the motion, I noticed some concern in Councillor Thorsen's speech, and I want him just to remind him there's Alberta law, there's Saskatchewan law, and then there's the charter. And it's the charter that helps confuse people, because we hear on the news about Saskatchewan rules, we hear on the news about the Alberta rules, and then our rules are different, or we have to find a mix and match to make something work. And as far as I can see, the folks that worked on this did a pretty good job. And I don't have a real handle on this like I feel I should, because I don't necessarily understand the whole system. But just keep in mind, guys, you got to work through your charter. So don't abandon your charter.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. It's unusual times call for unusual measures, and if people were truly understanding the nature of COVID-19 and how quickly it can transmit and multiply and double over X number of days, and the fact that we are seeing death rates, even though about half the deaths are in seniors' homes, somehow there's a trail of this virus, and the virus isn't starting in the home, it's starting elsewhere in the community. And we're seeing this level of community transmission. That's an issue. And I think there's no point in asking people to do something, even if it's for their own good, without having some leverage or some ability to enforce it so people will comply with it. Safety belts are another example. We all know, and we knew long before we mandated, that they were actually there for your benefit. But until we started handing out the fines, people didn't really pay attention to it. And perhaps this is a similar piece here as well. So I think, is it the most tasteful thing to have to do and go out and give people tickets because they're actually getting together? And if you walk through the city, you can see it happening all the time. In my walk, that's usually daily, I see it and go, well, do you realize what you're doing and what you're opening your family up to, and your perhaps even your parents or seniors that you make contact with? And I'm not sure what, some people believe there's absolutely no risk, no harm, and yet all around us we're seeing serious consequences for many, many families that are in very tough times. So unusual times call for unusual circumstances, and yeah, I support this. Let's get on with it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Not seeing any. I will look for direction on bylaw number 15-2020, the Emergency Management Bylaw Amendment. Councillor Fagnan.
I move that Council grant first reading to bylaw number 15-2020, Emergency Management Bylaw Amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Baker, thank you very much. Any further discussion on the question? Not seeing any. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Fagnan, would you be so kind to carry on?
You bet. I just move that Council grant second reading to bylaw number 15-2020, Emergency Management Bylaw Amendment.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Baker. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you.
Opposed? Carried. Councillor Fagnan.
Council unanimously consent to consider bylaw number 15-2020, Emergency Management Bylaw Amendment for a third and final reading.
Seconder, Councillor Baker. Thank you. Any further discussion before I call for the question? Not seeing any comments. All in favor?
And I see it's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Carried. Councillor Fagnan, if you carry on, please.
That Council grant third and final reading to bylaw number 15-2020, Emergency Management Bylaw Amendment.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Baker. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 7.5. Let's look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 7.5, bylaw number 16-2020, property tax penalty bylaw amendment, I'll ask Scott Purdy to present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon, Scott.
The subject matter is bylaw number 16-2020, property tax penalty bylaw amendment. Our recommendations are that Council grant first reading to bylaw number 16-2020. Second, that Council grant second reading to bylaw number 16-2020. 3, that Council grant unanimously consent to consider bylaw number 16-2020 for third and final reading. And 4, that Council grant third and final reading to bylaw number 16-2020. The issue is an amendment to bylaw number 18-2019. The property tax penalty bylaw is required as a result of of Payment Relief Option Plan due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The background to Property Tax Relief Option Plan was passed by Council at the April 6, 2020 regular Council meeting. As a result, an amendment is required to bylaw number 18-2019, the property tax penalty bylaw, to align with the temporary new penalty schedule that was approved. Option 1 is the Council grant all 4 motions indicated in the recommendation above. Option 2 is the Council not consent to reading the third reading at bylaw number 16-2020, or 3, that Council requests further information to be brought back to a further Council meeting. This item is in alignment with open and responsible government, ensuring the city is listening and responding to residents during this difficult time. Bylaw number 16-2020 has been reviewed by legal. I'll pass it back to you, Your Worship, for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Scott. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. You know, it's one of those things where I agree with Councillor Torsen on the granting of multiple reads of a bylaw in one sitting. This is another example, however, where I would usually not do that. This is another example, however, where I am very much in favor of it. Further to my comments before, where people have been asking, what is the city doing to help me? Well, this is it, right? If you actually compare what Saskatchewan is doing as a provincial government and what Alberta is doing as a provincial government, it's one of those rare instances where the charter, well, not rare, but a great instance where the charter allowed us to go above and beyond and to do things that neither province is actually doing. You know, these are good things. And if we can get this bylaw passed through right away, it's housekeeping to a point, because it's already public knowledge that we're doing these things. But I would be supporting putting all these readings through today, just to prove that we are responsive, we are paying attention, and this needs to happen.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Councillor Torsen.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just to add to Councillor Buckingham's points, there is, you know, I think it's important that that it's acknowledged that we're just doing what we can. We have some tools in our toolboxes, and we're doing everything that we can to try and ensure that we can both have the city's operations continue and the high level of service where we can provide it can continue, and also acknowledge that there's some opportunity for us to kind of give some relief to individuals and businesses in terms of repaying their property taxes. I know there's going to be a lot that are going through a rough time right now if they're not able to work. So that June deadline would have been a really big challenge. And there's going to be a lot of employers as well that don't necessarily have any revenue coming in right now. So cash flow is going to be of the utmost importance to them. And having that bill coming at the end of June would have been a very big challenge for a lot of them. So, you know, it feels good to be able to do something. Circumstances are terrible to have to do something. I wish that there was no issue here, but knowing that we can do something and we're doing what we can to help residents and businesses get through this tough time, to me, that's what being on council is all about, is doing what you can to improve quality of life for people, and I hope that this helps some people get through the tough times. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Scott, if I could ask, by bringing forward this bylaw today, will we need to hopefully be through COVID-19 and everything else, come back next year and repeal this bylaw because it has a certain item, or is it a one-time shot with this bylaw? How can you?
Thank you for your question, Mayor. This bylaw will actually expire as of after the last waiver is done. So there'll be no need to come back to the current bylaw will come back in place.
Terrific. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that appreciate administration bringing this forward after bringing forward the action plan recommendation that they did for the community and council acted on. Now we're just following up, making sure the procedures are in place to make sure all the mechanisms are correct. And I appreciate that in the form of the bylaw. Any other comments or questions? With that, I will look for council's direction on bylaw number 16-2020, the property tax penalty bylaw amendment. Councillor Torsen.
I move that council grant first reading to bylaw number 16-2020, property tax penalty bylaw amendment.
Seconded by Councillor Buckingham. Thank you. Any further discussion on that item? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Did you get everybody, City Clerk? Thank you. Carried. Councillor, I'll look back to you, Councillor Torsen.
I move that council grant second reading to bylaw number 16-2020 property tax penalty bylaw amendment.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Buckingham. Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Got everybody, City Clerk? Thank you. Councillor Torsen.
Yeah, I move that council unanimously consent to consider bylaw number 16-2020 property tax penalty bylaw amendment for a third and final reading.
Councillor Buckingham seconded. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor?
And I see it unanimous. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. Carried. And Councillor Torsen.
I move that council grant third and final reading to bylaw number 16-2020 property tax penalty bylaw amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Buckingham seconded. I will ask, is there any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Carried. Thank you very much, Scott, for that.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Two. Moving on to agenda item number 8. I see Mayor and Council reports. I don't have a formal report to attach, but I just want to first start by saying our thoughts and prayers are with Colchester County of Nova Scotia, members of the RCMP for their loss, and all other families that have suffered from a great loss that's occurred in Nova Scotia over the weekend. That tragedy just really just hit me very hard because every community prides themselves in their safe and community, including ourselves. And I'm sure Colchester County is no different. It's a beautiful part of Nova Scotia. I've had a chance to visit a couple times, and just the actions that have happened there to one individual has resulted in a great loss for the community. So I wanted to extend the thoughts and prayers of our city, and I did reach out this morning to the mayor by email of Colchester County and expressed our sincere condolences to them on their losses that they've incurred. Patrick mentioned earlier the National Volunteer Week. I think it's so important. We've become focused on COVID-19 for many good reasons, but also we've lost a lot of good things that have missed that. And a lot of events in the community have been canceled, and an opportunity to acknowledge the volunteers that work throughout our city and in our surrounding communities. It's so important that without volunteers, things wouldn't happen. We know there's still volunteers today helping at various organizations that are still supplying for those in need, be it the food bank, through various organizations. It's terrific to see, and I want to acknowledge those volunteers for continuing to support the people in need today. Those needs have not disappeared. In some cases, they've actually grown. And so that's very concerning. But I do appreciate the work that the volunteers do, and it's important that we recognize volunteers when we have the opportunity. It was touched on just a moment or two ago in the last 2 bylaws regarding that what we've carried out today. And I know our council has strived very hard, and I would agree the comments that were made about not passing a bylaw in 3 readings at one council sitting, but we are at times that we've never seen before. You know, I look at what the city has done. We've done city staff reductions at the city already, as many employers have gone through, and we can relate. We have fellow employees that are no longer working for the city. We've come up with a postponement program for utility bills to help residents and businesses, as well as what we just completed, the tax deferment if required for businesses and individuals. And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. I hope we're able to lend an assisting hand as a community and help everyone as best as we can through what they're facing. But at the same time, for those that have the ability to pay their utility bills or a portion of their utility bills or tax bills when they come would be appreciated from the perspective that we still have a city to run. We still need water and sewer to flow. We still need the police to answer calls. the fire department and the staff that's working at the city. We have projects that we hope to take advantage of. And I look to the screen, we just talked about how we're going to hopefully get a great buy on construction work at the library. And there's other projects that will be coming forward for the city because we have to continue to replace water and sewer lines that are 25 to 50 years old. And we know they do break. And if we don't get ahead of it, we're just going to have more leaks to repair. So there's work that's going to have to continue, but the bills have to be paid. So I ask people, the residents and taxpayers, to continue to work with the city. We're trying to work with you as best as we can, given the tools we've been given, because at the end of the day, we will get through this, and it takes everyone's effort. So I want to say thank you to a great community, because we've seen a lot of action or a lot of activities where people are trying to boost their neighbors and their friends and just people in general. And it's great to see the signs, the windows that are painted, the sidewalk chalk that's been going out lately. It's terrific. And it's enlightening to see life in our community, even though when I look out on 16 highway behind me, it's very slow, but we know that people are still, we're just trying to get through this and can't wait. I know people can't wait to get back to some sort of normal sense of life. So thank you so much for the community for bearing with us and working with us, working with our bylaw and RCMP, healthcare workers. It's, it takes an entire community to make this happen and to get through this, and we will get through it together as a community. I look to council if there's any other comments that anyone wishes to add. Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, it's perhaps more under number 9, any other matters, Your Worship, but our sister city in Ukraine, I'm wondering if it's would be a thoughtful and kind gesture to reach out and wish them well in these circumstances and let them know we're here and thinking about them and wishing them well.
Thank you, Councillor. I will follow up with that this week and send off a note. Any other comments from councillors? Not seeing any. I will look to Eric regarding inquiries from the media.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just to step in here just for a quick second while you're on the topic of our Canadian community members in Nova Scotia, just wanted to express or sort of pass along a message that we did receive a message on Facebook from one of our, from a resident, Brittany. She commented saying that she does appreciate that we've extended our condolences to her community. She is originally from Nova Scotia and is appreciative of seeing the city's flags at half-mast.
Well, thank you. That's great.
And for requests for the media, we do have a interview request for yourself, Mayor Albers.
All right. With that, I will look for a motion of adjournment. Councillor Buckingham, motion to adjourn. Thank you again, Council. This has been, again, most interesting. I appreciate the cooperation of everyone as we work through this new digital virtual reality of Council and working through the meetings. So thank you so much for your patience. Thank you to the presenters, administration. I know we continue to trying to work through technical challenges, and we will continue to persevere. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Worship.
Thanks.
Thank you.